So I just wanted to have you on for our jazz memes audience. We have a lot of young players, young musicians, some older cats too, but a lot of them are players really trying to learn about jazz, learn how to play guitar, all of that. So I really thought they could learn a lot from your experience, and we'll get into your playing, get into your albums, and a lot of the stuff that you offer as well. Not besides just the music, whether it's your PDFs and books and lessons, private lessons if you have availability to study with you. So thanks again.
Sure.
And
Great to be
yeah,
here.
let's get into it. So for those that don't know, this is Jonathan Kreisberg. He's one of the top jazz guitarists, modern jazz guitarist, playing now. Although the gigs have stopped in this COVID-19 time. But you've recorded, I think, about 10 albums yourself, as well as many on a bunch of other records as a sideman, and really known for your playing and compositions. So I thought we would start really with your early influences in music. So when you were growing up, how did you really get into music? What were those early influences? And then how did that lead into jazz as your genre of choice?
Yeah, my dad had a great record collection when I was a kid. So even before I remember playing guitar, I remember hearing a lot of great music. There was he had stuff like Miles, Round About Midnight.
Hmm.
He had Coltrane's My Favorite Things, and as well as like stuff like Christopher Parkening playing the Aranjuez Concerto on guitar, classical
Hmm.
guitar, and then a lot of stuff from a lot of classic rock stuff that I heard a lot, which was like The Who and Cream and stuff like that. My dad loved all that stuff, so he had pretty wide-ranging tastes. And I remember listening to the records around the house, and those were the ones that I think a lot of those I liked a lot, even before I was playing music. Um, and I remember when I first heard Eddie Van Halen playing
Hmm.
Eruption, and there was it wasn't necessarily the band, it was like that solo thing. When I heard that, there was something that really drew me. And years later, I kind of would follow a lineage and realize that Eddie was trying to sound like Alan Holdsworth, who was trying to sound like Coltrane. So it was all kind of still connected to My Favorite Things and the stuff I had already heard.
Yeah.
But culturally, of course, we wanted to play guitar. I mean, we were kids in the 80s. I mean, it was like. So, I started playing guitar. And even before I got into jazz, I I know that one thing that I was always attracted to was this kind of improvisational element. Using at that point I was kind of using, like a lot of kids do, using the theory and then kind of improvising. Using that stuff and things I
Hmm.
was learning from records at that point, more rock records and blues. I also began playing classical guitar, and I was really interested in that. Um, Although I just kept feeling myself kind of pulling towards the improvisational element. So we're talking when I was 14 years old or something like
Hmm.
that. I had rock bands, and I just liked to improvise. It was that was even already happening. And I hadn't put together yet that I could connect this instrument, the guitar, with this kind of language of stuff that I'd heard, which at that point it wasn't necessarily like bebop. Like my dad wasn't really like listening to bebop. He was listening to like probably stuff that when he was a kid was big, which was in the you know basically it would be like 60s jazz. So it
Okay.
was Miles, late 50s, early 60s
Hmm.
jazz. Coltrane, like I said, like those records were big. Of course, Kind of Blue. I left that out, but of course I was hearing that.
Yeah.
So and then I had a teacher when I went to my senior year. I was basically in a regular high school in Miami, and it was one day when I was in the guitar class, and the guitar teacher came over to me and said, "Jonathan, how do I play this part?" And that's when I realized, like, maybe I should go to another school. I mean, she meant well,
Yeah.
and she was just a classical bass player by training. She wasn't a guitar. So I had a friend. He said, "Man, you should go to this New World School of the Arts. It's a high school." So I was pretty late to go there. I went there as a senior, and I started with a guy named J.B. Dias, who's a great teacher who's there, taught a lot of us from there. Went on to do a lot of stuff with the Thelonious Monk Institute, which is now Herbie Institute, right? And he really just kind of helped me to suddenly connect all this theory and classical and improvisational and, you know, rock and blues stuff that I was doing with this thing that I loved listening to, jazz, but how to kind of play it, you know. And then suddenly it all came together at that point. So I was probably 16 years old, I guess, at that point. And that was when I got bit by you know, realized that the language of a lot of this stuff I was checking out on the 60s stuff came from the 50s and connected it to the bebop language. And I just ran with the bebop language and really, you know, got very deep into that and the craft of what that means.
Yeah, I mean, I know like you have so much guitar technique in the realm of jazz, especially anyone who's really even heard you playing. But even going back to that era when you were in college and younger, I know you were doing a lot with like the rock fusion and all of that, whether it's like tapping, all of that. When you were doing that kind of music, what made you, I guess, lean more towards a traditional jazz sound, or even, you know, the instrument, a Stratocaster versus, you know, an archtop?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't even know if I could clearly say it because a lot of that just happened naturally. And I you know, I got my 175 a long time ago. I was probably 18. I was at the University of Miami. I was playing the Strat still a lot. Even when I was playing jazz gigs, I was sometimes playing on the Strat, you know, which is funny when I see that coming back around now because it's kind of not really happening for a while, you know. And I think for me, the big thing that happened was, you know, a realization at some point that like really what I loved was, you know, composing music that was kind of harmonically sophisticated and improvising and all this stuff. And I realized that I loved Alan Holdsworth and I loved that sound and his universe that he created. But besides that, really, I was listening to jazz, you know, like, you know, I was listening to Keith Jarrett, I was listening to Coltrane, I was listening to Miles, Wayne Shorter, Herbie. These are all my biggest influences, you know, Tristano at that point. Besides that, it's Holdsworth, you know, and Holdsworth was the one thing that was kind of keeping me connected to that sound. And I realized like that, you know, it wasn't there was certain things missing for me, you know. I love the expansiveness of sounds and creating new universes with sound. You know, I love that. But what I didn't like, if I had to really put my finger on it, and I don't even know if I could have put a word into words at that point, was, you know, with what we call fusion thing. They don't like to call it that now, even though everyone's playing it. But you know, it is a couple things, you know, is one is the lack of dynamics. You know, I love dynamics, you know, and really, you know, it's just something that the more electrified things are, it changes the touch of the drummer. It changes the dynamic level, you know, the dynamic range. It kind of, it can
compress, right?
Yeah, it tends to narrow and get up there, you know, so that was one thing that I really wanted to keep in the music. And I knew that was something that was going to be difficult. The other thing I used to notice was, you know, as a guitar player, is Alan Holdsworth would often switch. He would have his pianistic side and he would have his kind of singing horn side, you know. And I liked that, but I also wanted a little more of a blur between the areas, you know. And I can still kind of go one way or the other, but there's this thing, especially back then at that time, that I was doing, which was, you know, basically trying to, I had like, I like to call it pianist envy, you know. I wanted to be a pianist. So I was trying to like kind of create this kind of trio sound, or even when I play solo, you know, sound where the chords and the melodies are more like two hands on a piano, you know. That's something I always worked on at a different kind of angle. And that started to get more and more interesting to me. And the other is just the top level of volume. You know, we were playing, it was just gigs, the fusion type gigs were just so loud, man. It was like your ears would be ringing after, you know. And so, yeah, the dynamics. Yeah, the other thing that happened was it started to shift my attention away from, and this is just my personal growth thing. It's not really directed at any style of music or anything. But for me, what I noticed is I started to dwell on the expansiveness of the music, like how many grooves are we putting together here? Are we contacting, are we reaching the people with all these sounds? Are we creating these feelings? Are we telling these stories? And that's great. I love all that stuff. But if you start to lose sight of melody, harmony, rhythm, the basic elements of music, and all the creative things you can do within them without ever worrying about all those other things, then you have a problem. That's what I think, and that's, I think, the downfall of a lot of fusion is it kind of, it became, the focus shifted to the texture and to the big picture a little too much. And you started to lose the subtlety and the sophistication of the harmonies and the melodies. And that, like, maybe that was bad, because I don't mean it as a judgment, because every music has its things that can be great. And some people manage to keep everything intact while they put things together, and at that time I just felt I couldn't do it anymore. So it worked with my move from Miami to New York. When I moved to New York, I really wanted to get deeper into I just need to grow more as a musician. And I did that by, basically getting rid of a lot of my gear, playing little gigs, playing hundreds and hundreds of standards, memorizing, learning more and more language from the history of jazz, and just kind of focusing, and for me it was great. And I feel like after that and until now, what I would kind of do is I kind of put things together, like kind of put them back together, all these things and these elements that I had in my experience, and I try and put them together in a way that's really personal, And I still, and as I go on, I'm probably using even more and more elements from that early period, but I'm doing it in a different way, And it's about the musicians I play with too, I mean, I'm using guys that tend to have a similar kind of process, and they've gotten into different angles. Like Colin Stranahan, who I play with, he kind of was more the other angle. He grew up a jazz kid, and then he kind of got more and more into other things as he went on, and now he's also always checking out new stuff and bringing it into the realm. But I like playing with a drummer that has a jazz aesthetic at the core, because that's a big part of the band is that the drummer has a certain dynamic level and feel,
Yeah, man, you just touched on so many things that I want to get into.
Yeah, I tend to have very long answers.
No, it's great. I have a lot of questions now. So one of the things that, I mean, just personally that I've noticed and have been a fan of in your playing is that combination of really the integration of the melody, harmony, and rhythm, where it doesn't feel like a lot of, quote, modern jazz nowadays, or people coming up learning jazz in school, like, oh, let's just make a tune in 19/8 because we can, or we can do this. And it really has no connection to anything other than they're just kind of throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. But your compositions, like one of the first ones that got me was South of Everywhere. And we ended up playing that in my combo. I was like, because you had the sheet music available online, right?
Yeah.
And that's just catchy without it feeling like, oh man, this is in 5, or this is this tune in that, and that's why it's cool. It's all of those elements together, and that's something I think you do really well, where it keeps the clarity of the composition without really sacrificing, oh, we're gonna have kind of a whatever melody just because we have a certain rhythm we want to get across, or all of the elements seem to connect. When you're thinking about that as a composer, is that really starting with the melody, or does it, how does that process look like to you?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm teaching, one of the hardest things for me to speak about is composition. Mm-hmm. It's weird. It's like I can break down a lot of things and kind of analyze them, as far as my approach. But composition, I think there's something about it that I'm a little wary about defining, because it's such a fluid and exciting kind of part of being a musician, to compose just like to improvise, and I think sometimes I worry that if I talk about it and codify how I do it, then I'm boxing in things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm careful about that, just to put that out there. But, in general, I'm definitely trying to, on some level, avoid the academic kind of, locked in way of looking at things. I'm definitely trying to open it up, and I'm trying to be open to, I can compose based on a melody, can compose based on a rhythm, can be just a feeling, can be, a groove, can be a harmony. They all lead each other in different ways on different compositions. I can say something like South of Everywhere, like it probably, if I could lead back to it, it probably started with, that, started with that. That was probably the kind of germ that, that seeded the tune, Hold on one second. I'm going to plug in. Believe it or not, it's a little cold in here
today.
Yeah,
no worries.
Yeah, so sorry about that. Is that making too much noise?
That's good.
I guess that's going to suck. You're going to have to edit that out, huh?
No, it's actually pretty low.
No, I mean edit out the little break.
Oh, that's fine. That's no problem.
Just started getting cold in here.
Yeah, that's no worries.
So let's see. How can I pick that up again?
I was really just asking you a little bit about your compositional process.
Yeah. Right. So, and when I wrote that groove, or came up with that groove, it wasn't even. I didn't even know it was in 5. I was just playing by feel and something I liked. In fact, when it came time to writing it out, I remember wasn't sure if I should write it in 5 or if I should write it as a bar of 6 and a bar of 4, as a bar of 4. And actually that kind of touches on kind of just in a small way what I'm going for. I mean, I don't want the music to necessarily be so easily definable.
Yeah.
But that being said, I write a lot of interesting, well, to me, interesting rhythmic ideas. And usually I'm looking for ones that have a sophisticated way of looking at them from different angles. That's kind of what I'm actually looking for. I like when something feels good, but you're actually not quite sure, and that's true about any kind of music, actually. I just kind of like that kind of, of course, there's nothing like a straight beat when it feels good, but like, for instance, Tell Me Something Good, Shaka Khan. When I first heard that groove, I still hear it. It still screws me up sometimes, and I love that it feels good, but you don't really quite know what's going on. Or Kashmir from Zeppelin, you know what I mean? Or where they've got the hemiola thing happening, like these kind of things. I just always was attracted to that sound. The Beatles had tunes, Bob Dylan had tunes that were based on actually early blues things like Robert Johnson, where the lyrics and the melody would actually shape the amount of bars and the phrasing,
Instead of it being like a 12-bar blues, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just what it is, depending on the phrasing, and there's a lot of ways to achieve that, some mysterious and some more obvious. I mean, a lot of my tunes have, different levels of polyrhythms. So even if it's a tune that's like a complicated rhythm, it might have another possibly more complicated rhythm that could go over it, or possibly simplifying rhythm that could go against it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean this might be a good time to bring up the tune 21 with your book.
Oh yeah. Oh hey, nice.
Right here.
Thanks, man. Cool.
No, I mean it's great. I've gotten so much out of this book. It's amazing. For anyone who doesn't have it, Offerings of Note. I'm trying to grab the page.
Thanks. Yeah, that's one of the few. Most of it is transcriptions and kind of ways to play through the heads and the solos, but there is one kind of pedagogical,
Mhm.
I don't know how you'd say that, section, which is like a prep section for 21, because the tune 21, like some of my other tunes, like the Lift,
Mhm.
they're a complicated rhythm that has a compound rhythm attached to it, right? So there's a whole, 2 or 3 page primer in there about how to feel that, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, in that way, some of my tunes, it's like if I had to describe it, they're almost like Afro-Balkan tunes.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because they're taking things from the Balkan area, which oftentimes are shorter phrases like eight, like a 9/8 or a
Mhm.
21 or these kind of things. So with 21, of course, it's 5/5/5/6, right? So it's which can sound pretty Balkan if you're thinking of it in the short form way, right? Um, Here, I'm going to get my little.
Oh, sweet.
I got a toy drum here that I thought I could use for this, just to kind of. This is not a real drum. Drummers out there, I'm sorry, but obviously the first rhythm is just going to be like, let me see if I can do this while holding the guitar. So it's if the rhythm is. So that's like a very relaxed way to feel it,
Mhm.
I was adding, something that just gives you like almost like a grounding, and that can, like I said, it's more complicated, but it actually kind of simplifies it a little bit, right? So the original rhythm being just 5/8 5/8 5/8 6/8.
Mhm.
Another way to do it is just a 21 is not going to work out evenly, and this is something that for the more advanced players, it's cool. For the more basic players, you can do the same thing with simpler rhythms. Start simpler, but this is obviously a tricky one. But you can just start by doing. Just Vonnie Terry showed me this with the tune he had. I don't remember what time signature it was, something complicated, but just to feel it, every odd bar can be felt 2 ways. Oh, just like a jazz bar on 1 and 3 or on 2 and 4, so the same thing works. So that's 21, but against 21/8 against 21/4, you could say, what I mean? And then the other thing that's to that tune that's interesting about 21, and what I was fascinated by in the first place, was it's divisible by 7. So if you listen to the second solo on that, it gives you a clue to how I'm feeling that in different ways. Because in my solo, I'm also feeling both rhythms.
That's what I was going to ask. When you're thinking of it as you're soloing, are you switching between these feels?
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing I did before was actually the thing I just did, but halftime. So
okay.
It's like,
yeah.
So you can hear when the phrase starts again.
Yeah.
Because it's after the 3 5s and the 6. So it's right.
Yeah.
It's in a different place, so that's 5. So. most. But the next one I want to show you is
Yeah.
actually the one that I feel a lot when I'm playing it, which is 7. It's taking the eighth notes of this and it's turning them into triplets, right? So instead of it's actually going to take it and we're going to put it into a triplet feel on 7, you know. So then you end up with this. So.
Yeah.
So now 21 becomes that. So then the idea of going between them is you can be from this. Let's try it. Yeah, so that's a bunch of different ways to feel it. Yeah, so basically, you know, when I'm blowing, you can actually kind of hear when I'm going between the different systems. If you really pay attention, you know, a lot of times if I start double timing, it's like double timing in the 7 against the 21, you know, because it just gives you another way to feel it, you know.
I think it's super interesting because a lot of people, at least, you know, more beginner, intermediate improvisers, when they're thinking about time or rhythm, when they're improvising, they're really thinking, you know, first of all, am I in time? Like, am I just like playing with some sort of feel, or am I ahead or behind the beat? But they're not really talking about these different feels or feeling different meters or like what we're just talking about.
Right.
They're kind of at maybe a level below what you're getting into.
Yeah, although the important thing to remember is that this is actually that's the reason I do it, is so that it feels more like it should feel when you play in 4.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? In other words, when we play in 4, what makes it interesting, especially as jazz musicians, is the polyrhythmic aspect. You know, any good jazz player, when they're swinging, they're hearing 6 and 4 at the same time. You know, when you hear a master like Elvin Jones play, it's constantly there. It's constantly, he's concurrently hearing 4 and 6 at the same time. You know, so this is actually the same thing. It's like, and that's kind of the point. Is like if you start playing in 21/8 or say 9/8, like my new tune, The Lift. You know, if you start playing that just as that kind of Balkan 9/8. It's cool, and those guys, of course, are ridiculous at that, and they bring that to the level. But to make it feel more like what we're used to in the jazz world, it kind of almost needs that other level to me.
Mm-hmm.
It gives it that organic kind of, you know, like I said, Afro-Balkan sound. You know, is you're adding that other level. Like I said, like The Lift, right? You guys, some of you might know that.
Yeah.
Off Capturing Spirits, I have a new album. And you know, that opening tune has that groove. So that groove right there is 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2. So that's 9, but it's by way of 3 2 2 2, right? 9 8. So that was one of the first things I did before I even brought the tune to the band. I sent them all basically like a sheet that had a bunch of rhythmic concepts, because to play a tune like that the way I was hearing it, everyone in the band had to know how to approach that,
Yeah.
And that one was kind of interesting. I'm gonna put the guitar down.
Yeah.
That one, all the drummers are cringing out there as I grab my little gift shop Colombian drum here. So what I realized about that one was that you really had to be able to feel very quickly between this duple and this triple thing, which is the same thing on 21, but in the 9/8, it's even more kind of usable, and actually more tricky too in a way, because what I wanted to be able to do on that one was really have multiple people playing in different ones at the same time, So what I realized is I needed a key. I needed like a master key of how to feel the two at the same time. And it was pretty simple once I realized what that was, actually. It's just to take, to break it down, what you should do is take the 3/4 aspect of the 9/8, which is a way to feel 9/8 if you want. But I wanted to be able to feel the other one against it at the same time. More importantly, the 9/4, which was how basically the drums were feeling a lot of it. So in other words, that's part of how it got the name The Lift, right? Because it's in 9/8. It's supposed to emotionally it lifts, but it also does a lift. If you feel it in 9/8 against the 9/4, right? Then you lift. The second bar is always on an upbeat, right?
True.
It becomes,
yeah.
So 9/4, which is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 on to get on. See, that becomes 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 7 8 9 1 2. So that becomes this, right? Here's the 9/4, right? 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. Wait, sorry. No, I was counting the 3. Sorry. So here's the 9/4, right? It's this one. Yeah, that second one is an upbeat. So
yeah.
That's the lift. So that's already kind of tricky if you're thinking of it really Balkan style, like, because that's your downbeat, right? That's a different feel. In fact, what I find is it's a real challenge to how you play lines, because there's two different ways. This is a little side thing, but it's interesting because it applies to this and 21, and actually any odd time that you play that can be divided into the 8th note and the quarter note bigger way. One way, with all the craft of playing lines and thinking of downbeats and upbeats, in one way you're actually targeting different tones, different beats. Because if you're playing in 5/8, your strong beats are going to be kind of 1 and 3 or something, getting bigger, or it's the way you target is going to be like that. Whereas if you feel it in the 5/4, it's a really different feel. It's a bebop feel, and you're thinking of beats, upbeats and downbeats, and it's all duple. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a tricky thing that, if you really like to think about, how to put together lines, it's really brings up a whole beautiful world, and but scary. And that's what I love about I tend to write that way because it gives me inspiration, and a challenge. So so back on that, there's your 9/4. So what I was doing there was switching the hands and switching the just so you can hear the sounds change. I was switching the hands from the opposite way. So we had the quarter notes here, and then went to the new quarter note here and the rhythm there. That's the basic level, right? Which is already pretty complicated for some people. So I was playing 9/4 with the rhythm and 9/8 against it. Then I was playing 3/4 with the rhythm of 9/8 against it. Both of them pretty cool. But when I realized I wanted to have both existing at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I had to do was go in and figure out, all right, what's the pulse of those two at the same time? And it's pretty cool, actually. It's actually going to be a quarter note triplet with the perspective of the 3/4 time.
Yeah.
It's going to be a quarter note triplet against starting on 1 and starting on 3 and starting on 2 with 2 bars of 3/4, right?
Okay.
Which will end up sounding like this: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's like our key, our master key, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're gonna have 3 rhythms at once: 3/4, 9/4, and 9/8.
9/8.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
So where it's loose, you know, and then you know you always have, you know, a lot you can find within those fields, you know.
No, that's crazy. That's
And of
awesome.
course, there's the other one we did on 21, the long form, which would be bo bep 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 bo bep, which in if you had to break it down, that would be 9/2 the time signature, you know. But yes, you know, this is just about ways of achieving what you were talking about, you know. Hopefully some way where it just, you feel it, you know, and it's organic. That's the idea, you know, is that it's not academic. Even though this level is very academic, the more you do this until it feels comfortable, you could argue that every point until this point where you feel loose and comfortable with all of them, it is academic. And it's only at that point when it becomes not academic and becomes organic, you know?
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is, it obviously takes a certain level of preparation and learning to get to that point, and then once you're at that level and accessing that feel, then you don't have to like maybe specifically think about that and think about it intellectually. You're feeling that groove.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
I think Jocko wants to say hi.
I know. I saw him pop in a couple times.
Oh, can you see him in the
Yeah,
background?
you see just like a little head.
He kind of baits me, so I have to chase him. You know? I know you told me a couple of the fans wanted to say hi to Jocko, so
Yeah, they did.
there's Jocko. Want to get a close up, hey, buddy? Man, I'll tell you, this Corona apocalypse would not be the same without him. He's really been, you know, my little companion through a lot of this. It's great. I recommend it. If anyone feels like they're lonely, go to the shelter, pick up a cat or a dog. You know.
Yeah, he's adorable.
Yeah, his personality's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, we had some some audience questions. If you want to answer a few of those. So Wilhelm Tenner asks, what do you think young musicians need to work on more?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I think the challenges now are really different than the challenges when I was a kid. You know, there's just so much information out there, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't put my finger on it. And I saw actually an interview not unlike this with Vinnie Caliuta, and they asked him the same question, and he just poetically put it in like, you know, it was tough to hear, but he was right. You know, they said, what do you think of the level of drummers right now? And he said, man, there's so many great drummers. You know, every time I turn on the computer, there's another one who is playing all this stuff. You know, the level of playing is really high. He said, mainly I attributed that to the fact that you can turn on the computer and everywhere you've got someone showing you exactly how to do it. Even on Instagram they're doing, especially guitar players, they'll play the craziest thing you've ever seen. They worked on it for 20 hours, then they slow it down and show it to you, just in case you didn't understand it. They completely demystify it.
Yeah.
And it's so weird because it was so different when I was a kid, it was like you would hear maybe someone like Metheny or Holdsworth or Schofield play something and say, whoa, what was that? But, that was it. If you saw it live, that was it. It's not on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's on a record, you'd have to, at some point you'd have to try and slow down the record. And then you had cassettes with the Marantz. We had the Marantz around, which was, it would half speed things, but it would drop it down an octave, know. It's pretty hilarious, to be figuring out some Holdsworth solo and be like, pretty rough, But in there, I think we kind of, there was some things to be learned, because, and I'm leading this into Vinny's answer,
Mm-hmm.
I think that we found our own way to struggle through it and approximate sometimes. I mean, of course you could figure out all the notes, but sometimes it was such a pain to learn all the notes that it was like, you would go and come up with something of your own that was kind of in the realm and its own kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
So, we were transcribing, of course, but we were also, it was a little more mysticism around the notes, it wasn't always so easy, and I think as a result of that and other things, there was a little more focus placed on finding your own voice and finding your own way to do things, your own solutions. So basically, Vinny Calhuta's answer, they said, man, I think the playing level is so high, but what I'm basically hearing is a heightened level of mediocrity. And that line to me just like, whoa, like talk about a master, just basically putting us all in our place, and I think what he means by that is, he goes on to describe it, and it's basically the same thing I'm saying, because with him it was even another level. He grew up on vinyl probably, so you had to, slow the needle down,
Yeah.
And I think that it just the struggle creates a little more feeling in the music and a little more personality, and that's one thing that today young musicians really need to be concerned about, so that's just on a philosophical, creative level. All right, Jacko's going to say bye now. I'll be done soon, bud. But the other thing is just, there's also so much stimulus that we can kind of forget about the same school that's always been there, which is, learning standards, learning how to play jazz,
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I'd recommend learning a ton of standards, By the time I was finished with high school, I probably had like 90 standards memorized. By the time I finished college, it was probably 300 or something, And I can't, anytime anyone asks me any question about composition, improvising, music, anything,
Mm-hmm.
I just can't separate it from that. I have to just tell them, you got to learn a lot of tunes, because that's where, well, actually, I won't say you got to, because they're them and maybe they have another way. But
Yeah.
For me, it's always goes back to the standards. That's where it kind of I feel like I developed my melodic sense learning standards. And my sense of the way the harmony and the melody go together, how to tell a story. All this stuff came from learning standards.
Yeah, when you have a student that's, maybe they're just really getting into jazz, they're learning their first couple of standards, Autumn Leaves, Stellar by Starlight, that kind of thing. Is there a certain way you would recommend someone goes about learning a standard at that beginner level where maybe they're not developed enough where they can just, play the tune and then hear all the changes, where that seems too insurmountable? I don't know if you have any advice for them.
Well, for one, it's very hard when you've been, playing many years,
Mm-hmm.
to go back that far into what if like to do that. I have memory issues already. I can't remember a couple of years ago, too well. I remember music, but everything else is blurry. But no, I basically, it's hard for me to advise someone at that level, although, I do have a way that I developed over the years about how to learn standards and use it as like a real lesson, and I know that I remember that I didn't always do it quite that deep, so if I had to think back, when I first started learning standards, I did it in a kind of like, I was also lucky. There were still some gigs out there. I was doing some gigs with older musicians where you would show up to the gig and they'd start playing and you'd have to figure out the tune. And those great experience too. So there's something to be said about learning a tune under pressure and like really, with guitar, a lot of it's like using your ears and just having a fingering that where you can play the melody, really quickly and just memorizing the chords as that's the chords, the specific names of the chords of the tune, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas I don't learn them that way now. I can't tell a student not to do that because that was part of my learning process.
At
And
the time.
maybe it was important,
Yeah.
And I know Joe Pass would talk about stuff like that, like instinct, like putting your hand on the guitar with any finger, and wherever the finger goes down, wherever your finger goes down, you start playing Stella, your pinky, third finger, second finger. And there's something about that instinct, But I think the other thing that I'm talking about gives you a way to kind of, develop your instinct because it's adding science and it's adding all this other stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that takes a long time. If I was to walk you through that other way, we would have another hour on our hands.
If anyone has those kind of questions, they should definitely hit you up for a lesson. Because I know even when we've done a lesson, you've gone into depth on it. So.
Yeah, no, this is the stuff that I'm actually, a lot of my students right now, we're working on that in the lessons, advanced, deep ways to learn standards and to use them as lessons, and with guitar, of course, there's this stuff that veers into solo guitar territory in a way,
We had a question about that actually, about how you could play and create, chord melodies on guitar, solo guitar, starting to get beyond. I think what the questioner was asking is getting beyond just the melody on top and then the chord and kind of moving everything, in a vertical way.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, that touches on basically this thing I do with the students for learning standards is actually, it culminates in something where we learn the melody with a lot of different directions of intervals and things like that. And then we also learn the bass line that way. And that's where, as a guitar player, it kind of goes into solo guitar territory, which is just to start in a place where you just combine a bass note and a melody, which is a way that teaches you syncopation, but it also makes you look at the relationship of the melody and the bass in a little more of a counterpoint kind of way, and you can take a simple tune and just kind of, play roots and fifths or something and say, taking you through a tune like that, just bass and melody, is gonna give you a lot of different kind of perspective moments to the tune.
Yeah, you can almost hear like that's the bones of a chord melody right there.
Exactly.
And you can see how you could totally develop from there.
Right, exactly. Because, I mean, as much as I love Wes or someone like that, a lot of that stuff would have been, more block chord oriented. This creates more syncopation. I mean, for people that know my solo album, One, you can hear that that's kind of the angle I was going for on that album, was to create a little more syncopation and polyrhythm than maybe some other amazing solo guitarists that just have slightly different angles on it, So, once you do that, then you eventually can add chords, and and more, phrasing the melody different. So even there, just adding that little,
Yeah.
So it's creating a kind of a different kind of. It sounds you're actually playing less notes, but it sounds like more.
It does. Yeah, it's a great way of putting it. It reminds me also of like your trioing album in the feel of it. Whereas I mean, even myself as a guitarist, when I think about playing in like a trio setting of just drums, bass, guitar, and I think a lot of other guitarists have this issue as well. We feel like we're either playing lines, and then we have to fit chords in somewhere, and then but when do we go back to our line playing, and then like it's like this fight. Whereas the way you end up playing it, especially in the trioing album, it's like just flows, and it seems like this is kind of part of that.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all. But yeah, that's definitely, it goes back to what I was saying about at that time, especially that was right when I moved to New York, and I was in my 20s, early 20s, and I was really trying to sound. I was not trying to sound. I was trying to capture the sound in my head, which was listening to Keith Jarrett and Bill Evans and a lot of trios, you know what I mean? And that's this is a very similar thing. I mean, it's just finding ways to, a lot of it's rhythmic, a lot of it's that you're finding ways to use chords in a way that's independent from the way you play the melody, and it just takes a lot of work, and you think about things, doing things like passing your finger, like, if you see I'm playing the same, if I'm here and I want to play a chord up there, I'm screwed, right? Unless I just move to that guy and then I do that, you know what I mean? So the singer is the D, right?
Yeah.
He never stops singing, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
As opposed to a lot of guitar players would go, even a little subtle thing like that. That's in a small way, that's actually what we're dealing with, you know what I mean, is learning to let the stuff sing, right? So even that, right, see that? Hear the E flat holding out?
Yeah.
Singing the whole time. You know what I mean? Because I don't want to let go of it. Right? So, it's really trying to sing, and make sure you don't put most guitar players, the problem they do, and piano players, to be honest, sometimes, is piano players less. Mm-hmm. But when a piano player does this, it's really striking. When they put the emphasis of the chords over the melody, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, the chords are not there to be served by the melody. The chords are there to serve the melody,
Yeah, it would almost be weird if, like, you imagine it as an actual singer and accompanist. It would be weird if, like, the accompanist is always, like, jumping on the melody note of the singer. Like, they would turn to you and be like, "What are you doing to me?"
Which happens, you know. And that's the thing. I mean, a master piano player is doing total the opposite. When you hear Herbie, when you hear Meldau, when you hear Keith, it can be really a different thing.
Yeah, no, but what you just brought up really...
Keith, it depends what era. I've heard Keith kind of go the other way. I heard something with him and Chet Baker the other day, which was really weird. But but he's always experimenting, so you gotta, that's going for something that day.
Yeah, I really like the point you made about having that note sing out, and specifically on guitar, because there's a lot of times where you might be able to reach a easier voicing for your hand by just, I'll play the melody note not on the B string, on the G string, and then that totally stops it. But it's never a consideration for the guitarist a lot of times, and it has, like you're saying, it has such an effect on whether it's. I think that's why a lot of your solo playing or trio stuff almost sounds like two guitars, because you're so aware of that melody note. It sounds like there's one guy playing that and another person playing the accompaniment.
Yeah, but Downbeat Magazine, actually, I had to write a letter to the editor, because when they reviewed one, even though it said on the press release and on the album, it said there are no overdubs on this album.
I remember that, yeah.
It was really funny. It was a compliment in a way, because he really thought it was. He said, tasteful use of overdubs of the second guitar. And I was like, no, that's just one.
That's amazing. I mean, you literally couldn't have a better compliment on that.
That's actually kind of true, yeah. But, some of those, it also has to do with the technique, because I'm not putting down the pick, whereas some guitar players would play with finger style.
Yeah.
So when I'm playing those things like, the pick is playing the bass, so it gives it a little different texture, almost like the finger playing the melody, the pick on the bass. It sounds like two different tones.
Yeah, you have some separation in like the attack.
Yeah. That was a conscious decision.
Okay.
Because some of those tunes I kind of wanted to put down the pick. Some things really sound better, with just fingers, but I kind of worked through it on a lot of those tunes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
well,
I know at some point I think I'll probably, I don't know if you know, I work a lot with My Music Masterclass, but I have one polyrhythmic guitar video that covers things that are kind of, related to this. I was a little out of tune. Hope that wasn't too nasty. But I think at some point I should probably, as well as doing an odd time thing, which is in the works already, I should probably do a solo guitar.
Yeah, I think that would be huge for people.
And there's a lot of, all these subjects we've been talking about, they're all related, it's like, this is, that's what's so cool about music, is there's always some angle to work on it, but we talked about the rhythm, and we talked about the bass notes and the melodies and singing and the solo guitar and all this stuff. It's like a lot of that stuff, it just comes together, like I was just thinking of another tune of mine, From the Ashes.
Okay.
Which is, just again, like that kind of polyrhythmic approach to it. It's actually, to me, that tune is in a different way. It's not like in the juxtaposed three. It's just that it has a 12/8 feel, and it has a kind of an organic way of feeling it, But this is the way whenever I play that tune, I'm thinking of it exactly the same way. I'm singing the melody over and the bass notes, and then I'm filling in the blanks, basically, when I play something. So it kind of got this.